streets of Prague were silent under a moonless sky. Shadows clung to the corners of alleys where no light dared to reach. In the heart of the city, an orphanage loomed like a stone sentinel, its walls blackened with age and sorrow. The children inside whispered tales that no adult would ever believe, tales of a nun whose eyes were hollow, yet burning with a strange, unnatural fire. Her name was Sister Elżbieta, though few dared speak it aloud. The townsfolk murmured of her devotion, of her piety, of the prayers she offered at midnight. But they did not know the secrets that hid behind her serene mask. No one noticed the faint stench that drifted from the kitchens, the subtle clatter of bones mingled with spoons and knives. Those who glimpsed her in passing felt a chill that lingered long after she had disappeared from view. Children spoke in trembling voices about the rituals she performed in the dead of night, rituals that called upon forces too dark to name. They said she moved like a shadow among shadows, her habits brushing the floor without sound, her hands carrying items that no living person should touch. Yet the orphanage thrived, strangely, almost miraculously. Children who were sick grew stronger, meals were always warm, and hunger seemed to vanish as if by magic. But the truth was hidden beneath a macabre layer that none could fully understand. Sister Elżbieta's prayers were not for God alone. Her devotion was intertwined with an obsession, a hunger that the living could not see. Behind closed doors, she prepared meals with ingredients that would make the strongest stomach revolt. Bones, stripped clean and bleached in silence, were ground into soups and baked into bread. She fed them to the children as nourishment, convincing herself that it was divine providence that guided her hands. At night, she walked the corridors of the orphanage with a lantern, its dim light casting grotesque shapes on the walls. The children's laughter, once cheerful, now held a hollow, eerie timbre, echoing the unseen horrors they had consumed. Sister Elżbieta sang hymns as she worked, her voice soft but sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Every corner of the orphanage held a shadow of her influence. Dolls were arranged in unnatural patterns, chairs stacked in impossible formations, and in the smallest cupboard, fragments of tiny bones were hidden under loose floorboards. Even the rats seemed wary of her presence, scurrying away as she passed, their squeaks muffled by fear. Townspeople spoke of strange happenings around the orphanage, a sudden mist that covered the streets, windows fogged from within though no fire burned, and faint whispers carried by the wind. Travelers avoided the area after dark, claiming that something in the orphanage watched, judged, and hungered. They did not know that the hunger was contained within walls of stone and habit, nurtured by a nun whose face remained calm, almost holy, as she orchestrated her ghastly devotion. Sister Elżbieta's past was as mysterious as her present. No records of her family existed, no letters, no childhood friends. She appeared in Prague suddenly, a young woman with a strange aura, accepted by the church without question. Rumors spread among clergy about her odd behavior, her fondness for solitude, and her obsession with purity. But whispers died in the candlelight of confessionals. She had a way of convincing everyone that her actions were righteous, that her motives were divine, and so she worked in silence, a shadow priestess of death hidden behind a mask of devotion. Yet even in secrecy, her work did not go unnoticed. The children spoke in hushed tones to each other, sharing dreams that were not their own, dreams filled with visions of bones and fire. They felt the cold touch of something that should not exist, a presence that lingered long after they awoke. Sister Elżbieta's eyes gleamed in the lantern's glow, reflecting a darkness that no candle could banish. Every evening as the city slept, she performed the unseen, the unimaginable, and the forbidden. She whispered prayers that seemed to curdle the air, recited names of the dead she claimed as her guides, and moved with a precision that bordered on ritualistic madness. The orphanage became a place of paradox, both sanctuary and crypt, where life and death danced together in grotesque harmony. The walls remembered every secret, the floors absorbed every footstep, and the shadows whispered truths that humans were not meant to hear. Sister Elżbieta fed her children, yes, but she fed them with more than bones. She fed them with fear, with obedience, with a twisted sense of salvation that would mark them forever. Outside, Prague carried on, oblivious to the horrors in its midst. Bells tolled, merchants shouted, and the wind carried the distant laughter of those unaware of the shadowed sanctum nearby. And inside, the nun moved with ritualistic grace, preparing the next meal, the next prayer, the next secret act that would bind the living to the memory of the dead. There was no hesitation in her work, only precision and devotion, a macabre dedication that chilled the soul. She believed in a higher purpose, a sacred cycle where bones nourished the living and the living served a higher, unseen law. Each night became more elaborate, more detailed, more precise, her methods refined to perfection, a dark artistry that only she could understand. And yet there was a sense that the walls themselves whispered warnings, that the air held the residue of past sins, and that the city outside might never forgive the orphanage's hidden horrors. The nights at the orphanage grew colder as winter crept over Prague, frost coating the windows like delicate lace that hid horrors within. Sister Elżbieta moved silently through the corridors, her feet never making a sound on the creaking floorboards. The children, wide-eyed and trembling, watched her with a mixture of fear and awe, unable to comprehend the rituals that shaped their every meal, every whispered word. Lamps flickered in the corners, casting grotesque shadows that danced like specters on the walls, reflecting the twisted devotion of the nun who ruled their lives. She spoke softly to herself, incantations that twisted language into something unholy, as if summoning forces from realms unseen. Even the air seemed heavy with a presence that was both protective and predatory, a paradox that only she understood. The meals she prepared were no ordinary fare. Each morsel carried the echo of the past, the remnants of life and death interwoven into a grim tapestry. Bones were crushed, simmered, and concealed beneath sauces that smelled faintly of iron and earth. She fed them as if in penance, claiming divine guidance, yet there was a hunger in her eyes that betrayed obsession rather than faith. At night she would pace the halls, inspecting every room, ensuring no morsel of her work went astray. Dolls sat in unnatural positions, their eyes staring at corners where no child dared go. Sometimes whispers of long-dead orphans seemed to drift through the corridors, as though the walls themselves retained memories of those who had vanished into her care. Visitors occasionally dared approach the orphanage, curious priests or city officials, but they left uneasy, their steps quickened by an unseen dread. No one ever reported hearing her chants, yet the echoes of a voice, low and chanting, followed them long after they had gone. Sister Elżbieta kept meticulous records, but not in books that anyone could read. Symbols etched into the wooden beams, scratches on the floors, and patterns in the dust marked her devotion, a secret language of bones and prayers. The children slept in clustered rooms, their breath shallow, haunted by dreams that were not theirs alone. They awoke with visions of feasts that smelled of iron, of shadows that stretched longer than their own limbs, and of a woman whose presence was both terrifying and magnetic. She taught them obedience, instilled in them reverence for what she called the sacred cycle, though none could name its rules or question its rationale. Each day she moved with precision, a conductor of rituals too ghastly for ordinary comprehension, orchestrating life and death with a hand both gentle and unforgiving. Even the rats avoided her, skittering silently through the walls, leaving traces of fear in their wake. Outside, the city went about its business, unaware of the unnatural order imposed within the orphanage. Bells tolled, merchants argued over prices, and snow fell softly on cobblestones, masking the scent that escaped the kitchen and lingered faintly in the air. Yet within, the balance of horror and care continued, unbroken and unwavering. Sister Elżbieta's past remained shrouded in mystery. Some claimed she had been a novice in distant lands, trained in arts of purification that blurred the line between sanctity and desecration. Others whispered that she had spoken with the dead, hearing instructions no living soul could bear. Whatever the truth, her devotion manifested in meticulous, horrifying meals that nourished both body and fear. Nights stretched long and cold, her presence casting shadows that twisted perception. The children grew, both in strength and in haunted understanding, their innocence molded into obedience and silent terror. In every corner her influence lingered, etched in scratches, in dust, in silence. She was the architect of an unseen cycle, one where bones fed the living and the living became vessels of unspoken rites. Even the clergy who passed her name in hushed tones could not fully articulate the dread she inspired. Each day was a ritual, each night a testament to her unyielding will. Candles burned low in the chapel, flickering against walls lined with more symbols than scripture. And through it all, Sister Elżbieta moved, methodical and merciless. No corner of the orphanage escaped her scrutiny, no child untouched by her presence. She was at once protector and predator, a dark figure whose devotion blurred morality and madness. The city of Prague slept obliviously, while inside, life and death intertwined in macabre choreography. Her work would leave marks unseen yet indelible, impressions that the children carried long after they left her care. Every meal, every whispered chant, every shadowed glance reinforced a cycle they could never escape. And so she continued, the nun who fed the orphanage with bones, a figure both feared and revered, bound by conviction and darkness, sculpting an existence that defied understanding, a haunting testament to devotion, twisted beyond human comprehension. In the cold silence, she whispered prayers that echoed like the tolling of distant bells, promises of sustenance, protection, and inevitability, a vow that nothing within her walls would escape her macabre vision. Prague, 1819. The city breathed under a gray sky, its cobblestone streets slick with winter rain. Citizens went about their lives unaware of the sinister presence within the heart of the city. The orphanage, a grim stone building on the outskirts, loomed over narrow alleys, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Inside, Sister Elżbieta ruled with a quiet authority that masked her twisted obsession. Children huddled in the cold dormitories, their small bodies pressed together for warmth, while outside the wind howled like a living thing. The orphanage had been standing for decades, a home for those abandoned by fate. Yet under Elżbieta, it became something far darker. She had arrived in Prague quietly, a young nun with sharp eyes and an unyielding presence accepted by the church with minimal scrutiny. Records of her early life were non-existent, whispers suggesting she had been trained in distant monasteries where rituals blurred the line between holiness and horror. The other nuns avoided her, intimidated by her precision and her eerie calm. She spoke rarely, and when she did, her voice carried a weight that silenced the room. Children whispered about her past, imagining stories of dark forests, ancient prayers, and dealings with forces beyond the living. They could sense something different in her, a power that made even the bravest tremble. The orphanage itself seemed to respond to her presence. Floors creaked in unnatural ways. Drafts whispered like voices, and shadows shifted even when no light remained. Those who visited felt unease pressing against their skin, an instinctual warning that something was profoundly wrong. Meals were prepared with almost obsessive care, but there was always a faint metallic scent, subtle enough to go unnoticed by the untrained nose. Elżbieta's methods of care were meticulous, bordering on ritualistic, and she often moved through the building at night, inspecting every corner. The children began to notice patterns, symbols scratched into the floors, strange arrangements of dolls and toys, and faint etchings on walls that no one else could read. These marks were not decorative, they were part of her secret language, a method of control and devotion combined. Townspeople spoke of her in hushed tones, labeling her strange but respectable, unaware of the horrors she orchestrated within stone walls. Local priests had brief encounters with her, noting her piety and order, yet feeling an inexplicable chill whenever she passed. She never broke protocol, yet everything she did seemed to radiate a subtle menace. Rumors circulated about the fate of orphans before her arrival, stories of disappearance and disease, yet the children under her care thrived in ways that were unnatural. Sickly children recovered quickly, and those who had once starved now ate with vigor, their eyes bright yet hollow. It was as if life itself had been twisted to obey her will. Even the city outside felt her influence. Markets seemed quieter, shadows darker, and the fog that rolled over Prague seemed heavier near the orphanage, curling around the building like a protective shroud. Sister Elżbieta maintained her strict routines with unwavering precision. Morning prayers, midday meals, evening inspections, and nightly rituals formed an unbroken cycle. The children were bound to her rhythm, their days measured by her shadowed presence. Some nuns whispered that she spoke with the dead, claiming guidance from spirits unseen. Others said she had no family, no past, arriving fully formed in both piety and madness. Whatever the truth, it did not matter. Her control was absolute, her influence undeniable. Every room in the orphanage bore her mark, whether in the arrangement of furniture, the faint etchings on walls, or the silent obedience of the children. Visitors reported an oppressive atmosphere, a heaviness that pressed on their chests, making them question their own senses. Elżbieta never explained herself, yet her aura demanded compliance, respect, and fear. Even the children, young and innocent, instinctively understood boundaries, speaking only when permitted and moving only as directed. She taught them obedience, but it was a teaching laced with subtle terror, ensuring their loyalty while instilling unease. Beyond the walls, the city carried on unaware. Bells tolled, merchants shouted, and life went on. Yet within the orphanage, time moved differently, measured by the rhythm of prayers, the grinding of bones, and the meticulous attention of a nun who had made darkness her domain. Sister Elżbieta's presence within the orphanage was absolute, her every action deliberate and precise. The children moved like shadows beneath her gaze, their small hands performing chores with careful attention, yet always under the silent weight of her scrutiny. She had a way of making even the most mundane tasks feel sacred, yet there was an underlying tension, an invisible cord that bound obedience to fear. Meals were served at exact intervals, each portion measured, each bite observed, and though the food appeared ordinary, it carried her dark touch. Bones carefully prepared and disguised became hidden sustenance, their presence known only to her and recorded in the secret language she etched into the orphanage itself. The walls, ceilings, and floors bore marks invisible to the untrained eye, scratches, symbols, and patterns that chronicled her devotion, her rituals, and the cycles of life and death she oversaw. No one dared question her methods. The other nuns, though present, deferred entirely to her authority. Whispered conversations ceased when she entered a room, and even the most confident elders felt the weight of her gaze pressing against their resolve. The city of Prague, vibrant and busy beyond the orphanage gates, seemed disconnected from the reality within. Market bells, carriage wheels, and the chatter of townsfolk contrasted sharply with the oppressive silence that reigned behind those stone walls. Outsiders occasionally entered, priests, inspectors, curious citizens, but always left with an uneasy sense that the building itself was alive, a vessel for something beyond comprehension. Sister Elżbieta rarely addressed them directly. She allowed her presence, her ritualistic precision, and the subtle disturbances of the orphanage to communicate the boundaries of her domain, and the children, bound to her rhythm, internalized these lessons quickly. They whispered in hushed voices about the signs she left, small collections of bones arranged in patterns that no adult could decipher, dolls posed in ceremonial positions, and floors polished to reveal faint carvings only visible in certain candlelight. Every detail mattered to her. Each act, however minor it appeared, was part of a larger design that intertwined nourishment, obedience, and devotion into an inseparable whole. Rumors outside the orphanage grew slowly. Citizens occasionally caught glimpses of Sister Elżbieta moving at night, lantern in hand, cloaked in shadows. Some claimed to hear the faint sounds of scraping or chanting, but no one ventured close enough to confirm. The city, steeped in superstition and fear of the unknown, gave her space, unknowing that she was orchestrating rituals that blurred the line between care and cruelty. In her private quarters, she kept journals of her work, not in conventional writing but through symbols and patterns only she understood. Bones, feathers, ash, and small tokens were arranged meticulously, each entry recording the cycles of her macabre devotion. Some nights she walked the orphanage alone, inspecting the children as they slept, ensuring no disobedience or deviation from the rhythm she imposed. Her methods, while horrifying, were precise. Every movement, every word, every gesture held meaning, part of a larger hidden structure she alone understood. The children, too young to comprehend the scope of her rituals, internalized the lessons nonetheless. Obedience became instinctual, fear became familiarity, and the macabre reality of their sustenance a secret shared only by those within the walls. Even the rats, drawn to the smells of the kitchen, seemed to sense the unnatural authority of her presence, retreating in silence. And yet, there was an order to her madness, a method in the darkness that made the orphanage thrive in ways no one outside could perceive. Sickly children recovered, the food was always sufficient, and no harm came to those who followed her unspoken rules. To her, the cycles of life and death, nourishment and obedience were intertwined into a sacred mission. Outside, Prague continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the unnatural patterns that shaped the lives of the children within the orphanage. Church bells tolled, merchants called their wares, and snow fell gently over the city streets, oblivious to the shadows cast by stone walls and the lantern light of a nun, whose devotion had grown beyond the mortal realm. Sister Elżbieta remained a figure of paradox, at once protector and predator, pious and terrifying, nurturing yet horrific. Every corner of the orphanage bore her influence, every object a testament to her rituals, and every child a silent witness to the cycles she commanded. The city might never know, and perhaps it was better that way. Within those walls, life and death danced together, orchestrated by hands both delicate and merciless. She moved with absolute certainty, a macabre conductor of a symphony that only she could hear. The orphanage had become her creation, a world shaped entirely by her devotion, fear, and obsession. And the children, bound to her rhythm and to the hidden truths she wove into every meal, every whisper, every shadow, were trapped in a reality they could never escape, yet one that ensured their survival in ways no ordinary caretaker could. The night stretched long, cold, and silent, punctuated only by her soft steps, the faint grinding of bones in the kitchen, and the distant echoes of the city that remained blind to the horrors hidden in plain sight. Rumors began to stir in the narrow streets of Prague, whispers that traveled faster than the winter wind. Citizens spoke of a strange aura surrounding the orphanage, a weight in the air that pressed against the lungs and chilled the bones. Those who had dared approach its gates at night told of flickering lanterns moving inside empty corridors, shadows stretching unnaturally, and the faint scent of iron carried on the cold breeze. Children returning from errands muttered stories of a nun with eyes like embers, who appeared silently behind them, her habits brushing the cobblestones without sound. Some claimed to hear soft chanting hymns when no one was near, as if the building itself had learned to speak. Merchants spoke in hushed tones about missing animals, the unexplained deaths of dogs and cats that wandered too close, and how no living creature dared linger around the orphanage after dusk. Even priests began to whisper of Sister Elżbieta's odd habits, her obsession with ritualistic order, and the peculiar nourishment she provided the children. The orphanage itself seemed to hum with life, a quiet, menacing presence that pulsed through the walls and floors. Children inside whispered of seeing fleeting figures at the edge of their vision, tall and silent, moving where no one should be. They described faint metallic tastes on their tongues, though the food seemed normal, and the shadows that flickered along walls during candlelit dinners felt alive, watching, waiting. As days passed, more unusual events emerged. Lamps extinguished inexplicably, floors seemed to shift slightly underfoot, and faint, untraceable scratches appeared in the wood of doors and cupboards. Sister Elżbieta responded with quiet precision, ensuring order while never acknowledging the growing unease. Her presence remained unwavering, her routines meticulous, as if the disturbances were part of a larger plan only she could comprehend. The children grew accustomed to fear disguised as normalcy. Whispered warnings among them told tales of shadows that lingered even when she was not present, of laughter that carried an echo too deep to belong to any living voice. Some older orphans claimed to hear faint whispers instructing them to move objects, arrange furniture, or leave marks in secret locations. They obeyed, compelled by a mixture of fear, habit, and the subtle, invisible authority she had instilled. The city outside, unaware, continued its rhythm, bells tolling and merchants calling, while inside time moved differently, measured by candles, rituals, and precise movements. Stranger still, the orphanage thrived in ways that baffled outsiders. Children recovered from illness faster than any physician could explain, their strength and growth unnaturally accelerated. The meals, though macabre in secret, sustained them, a grim testament to the cycle Sister Elżbieta maintained. Every visitor sensed unease yet could not articulate why. Priests leaving the orphanage would later shiver uncontrollably, feeling eyes upon them long after the building disappeared from view. Word of her oddity spread cautiously among the clergy. Some wrote it off as eccentricity. Others feared her influence, but none dared challenge it directly. Sister Elżbieta continued unfazed, orchestrating events with careful timing and meticulous attention. Objects in the orphanage shifted in subtle ways, small details rearranged overnight to form hidden patterns. Dolls were posed in ritualistic alignments, toys stacked in impossible configurations, and tiny, almost imperceptible symbols etched into floors and walls chronicled every action. The children, unwitting participants, mirrored her precision, unknowingly taking part in rituals older than the city itself. Even the air seemed altered, heavy with an indefinable presence, a lingering sense that something beyond comprehension watched and judged. Yet the nun herself moved like a phantom, silent and deliberate, guiding the rhythm of life and death, nourishment and fear. On some nights, the wind outside carried soft, indistinct murmurs, faint enough to be dismissed as imagination, yet persistent enough to unsettle the bravest townsfolk. Local children avoided the area, citing nightmares that mirrored the orphanage's secrets. Shadows consuming the light, meals tasting faintly of iron, and figures with hollow eyes moving silently through corridors. Sister Elżbieta seemed to thrive on these whispers, her authority growing, her rituals becoming more elaborate. The orphanage had become a place where reality bent to her will, where life and death intertwined in ways unseen by the outside world, and where the children, bound to her routines, unknowingly carried fragments of unspeakable acts. Every day added layers to the growing tension. Every night cemented fear and obedience. The city of Prague slept unaware, while inside the orphanage rituals deepened, shadows lengthened, and the line between care and horror blurred. Sister Elżbieta's influence, once subtle, now permeated every aspect of the orphanage, preparing the stage for a climax that would mark the lives within forever. The tension within the orphanage thickened as Sister Elżbieta's rituals grew more intricate. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, bending unnaturally along the walls, moving independently of the flickering lanterns. The children whispered among themselves, fear mingling with fascination, each secret glance carrying the weight of unspoken truths. They noticed patterns in the food, subtle differences in the texture, the faint metallic tang that hinted at ingredients no living person should consume. Some tried to resist, but the instinctual fear she instilled ensured obedience. Nights were long and silent, save for the soft scraping of bones in the kitchen, the faint murmur of hymns twisted with something darker, and the occasional shiver that ran down the spines of those who lingered too long near the hallways. Sister Elżbieta moved through these corridors with calculated grace, inspecting rooms, checking hidden marks, ensuring that every ritual remained perfect. She spoke softly to herself, incantations that seemed to warp the air, words that no one else could comprehend. Visitors who dared enter sensed the oppressive aura immediately, their instincts warning them of unseen forces at work. Yet the nun never addressed them directly. She allowed her presence, rituals, and the subtle disturbances to communicate her authority, letting fear speak louder than words. The children, meanwhile, were subjected to lessons that blurred morality and survival. They were taught obedience through silent observation, learning to anticipate her moods, to understand the rhythm of her rituals, and to internalize the macabre lessons hidden in daily life. Even the smallest details mattered. A doll placed at a specific angle, a symbol etched on the floor, a meal arranged in a precise pattern. The orphanage had become a living organism, responding to her presence, growing in unnatural ways and shaping the lives of those within its walls. Strange events continued to unfold. Lamps extinguished without explanation, windows fogged from within, and faint whispers seemed to drift from empty corners. Sometimes fleeting figures appeared just beyond sight, vanishing when observed directly. The children accepted these occurrences as part of life, bound to the rhythms of fear and obedience. Rumors among the townspeople intensified. They spoke of mysterious lights in the windows, the sound of chanting carried on the wind, and a sense of something watching from within the stone walls. Few ventured close after dark, and those who did returned pale, uneasy, unable to describe what they had seen. Sister Elżbieta, unshaken, continued her work with unwavering precision. The balance of care and horror she maintained became more refined. Every movement, every whispered word, every meal prepared in secret was a calculated act, reinforcing control while nourishing both body and fear. Even animals seemed to recognize the power she held. Rats avoided her quarters, birds shunned the grounds, and stray dogs never lingered near the orphanage. The children grew in strength and health, yet each bore the subtle marks of psychological imprint, shadows lingering in their eyes, instinctual obedience etched into their movements. In the dead of night, she often walked the halls alone, lantern in hand, inspecting the hidden symbols, verifying the alignment of objects, ensuring that her rituals continued flawlessly. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the building had absorbed her will and reflected it back in whispers and shifting shadows. Outside, Prague continued in ignorant tranquility. Snow fell softly over rooftops, church bells rang at regular intervals, and citizens went about their lives, unaware that darkness thrived at the heart of the city. The orphanage had become an entity unto itself, alive with the unseen forces Sister Elżbieta invoked, sustaining life through methods incomprehensible, terrifying, yet meticulously controlled. Each day layered the tension, each night reinforced her dominion. The children, bound by fear, habit, and the subtle promise of sustenance, unknowingly participated in the macabre orchestration. The city remained blind to the horrors within, while inside, every corner, every shadow, and every sound reinforced the unnerving truth that life and death intertwined under the precise, watchful eyes of a nun who had transcended conventional morality. Soon the events she orchestrated would culminate in acts that no one outside could imagine, a climax of ritual and fear, shaping the lives within forever. The night of reckoning arrived silently, as if the city itself held its breath. Sister Elżbieta moved through the orphanage with deliberate precision, her lantern casting flickering shadows that twisted like living things along the walls. The children huddled in their beds, aware that something extraordinary, something terrifying was about to unfold. The air was thick with anticipation, tinged with the metallic scent that had become synonymous with her presence. In the main hall, she arranged the elements of her ritual with meticulous care. Bowls filled with ground bones, candles positioned to cast eerie geometries across the stone floor, and symbols etched into the boards that carried hidden meaning only she understood. Each child was called forward, their small bodies trembling as they followed her instructions without question. She moved among them like a conductor, orchestrating their positions, their movements, their silent compliance. The night stretched long, punctuated by the soft scrape of bones against ceramic, the whispered invocations of a nun whose devotion had become indistinguishable from obsession. Shadows danced unnaturally along the walls, stretching and curling as if alive, responding to the cadence of her chants. The children's eyes reflected the lantern light, wide and fearful yet compelled to obey. Elżbieta's voice rose in intensity, layering her chants with precision, calling upon forces unseen to bless, control, and bind. Outside, the wind howled through Prague's empty streets, carrying with it an echo of the unnatural events transpiring within the stone walls. No living soul witnessed the unfolding, but the city seemed to tremble, sensing the disturbance. The final preparations were exact, ritualistic, and horrifying. Bowls of darkened porridge containing the macabre sustenance she had prepared were set before the children. They ate in silence, their faces pale, their hands trembling as the nun's eyes scanned every movement, every bite, every heartbeat. As the ritual reached its apex, a hush fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. The children's breaths became shallow, their bodies frozen with tension, while Elżbieta moved with an almost supernatural calm. Her lips whispered prayers that twisted faith into a conduit for unseen forces, the air itself seeming to vibrate in response. Shadows thickened, rising from corners and ceilings, casting grotesque reflections that merged with reality. The candles flickered violently, yet never extinguished, as if bound by the same power that guided her actions. Every sound, every movement, every whisper in the room reinforced the duality of fear and devotion that she had instilled over months. The culmination of her work, her obsession, was laid bare. The children nourished yet complicit, shadows dancing in response to rites older than memory, and a nun whose control over life and death transcended comprehension. Silence eventually settled, though it was a trembling, uneasy quiet. The children remained frozen, a testament to both obedience and terror, while Elżbieta inspected the final alignment of symbols, ensuring perfection in every detail. Outside, the city remained oblivious, bells tolling unaware of the macabre orchestration within stone walls. Sister Elżbieta stood in the center of the hall, her gaze sweeping over the children and the ritual, satisfaction evident yet tempered by the solemnity of her task. She whispered final prayers, low and resonant, sealing the cycle she had begun, cementing the balance of nourishment, fear, and obedience she had cultivated. The orphanage itself seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the completion of a sacred, horrifying act. Each child bore the mark of the night, fear, compliance, and an imprint of macabre knowledge that would linger indefinitely. The ritual had reached its climax, the culmination of months of hidden work, of meticulous planning, of devotion twisted into something unholy yet controlled. In that hall, shadows, whispers, and the presence of Sister Elżbieta converged, creating a moment that no child would ever forget, a night suspended between life and death, obedience and horror, care and cruelty. The final act of the ritual left the room charged with an unseen energy, a residue of fear and reverence that permeated every stone, every plank, and every breath within the orphanage. Sister Elżbieta's eyes glimmered in the lantern light, reflecting the completion of her dark masterpiece, and the children, trembling yet alive, understood without words that they had witnessed something both sacred and profane, a moment where the boundaries between nurture and nightmare were erased entirely. The final moments of the night unfolded like a living nightmare. Sister Elżbieta moved among the children with quiet authority, ensuring that each gesture, each posture was perfect. The hall was alive with shadows that shifted independently, curling and stretching toward the ceiling, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to observe every action. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic scent of bones and the faint tang of fear, mingling in a way that made breathing almost a conscious effort. The children, their faces pale and eyes wide, obeyed her silently, moving in rhythms dictated by months of careful conditioning. She whispered incantations under her breath, words older than memory, twisting prayer into something both terrifying and magnetic. Every candle burned with a steady glow, their flames flickering only as her will permitted, casting long, unnatural shadows that danced across walls lined with hidden symbols. The ritual demanded precision. A single misstep could unravel the balance she had painstakingly cultivated. She watched each child, noting every twitch, every faltering step, correcting silently with gestures so slight that only the trained eye could detect them. Their meals, macabre in origin, had nourished not just the body but the subtle obedience that defined their lives. The air pulsed with tension, thick and almost tangible, as if the room itself were a living entity responding to her control. Outside, Prague slept, oblivious, while inside, the orphanage became a theater of shadows, sound, and unseen forces. Time seemed suspended. Minutes stretched into eternity as the final elements of the ritual fell into place. Sister Elżbieta's movements were both delicate and exacting, hands gliding over surfaces, adjusting bowls, straightening symbols, all without a single misstep. The children, bound by fear and fascination, remained perfectly still, their breath shallow, their hearts pounding in synchrony with the rhythm of the nun's chants. Shadows converged near the corners of the room, thickening, curling into shapes that mirrored the macabre patterns she had etched into the floors and walls. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, yet the children did not flinch, trained to accept it as part of the sacred cycle that defined their existence. The climax of her ritual reached a peak as she circled the hall, lantern in hand, observing the alignment of each object, the posture of each child, and the pattern of the shadows. A silence fell, heavier than any sound could convey, a pause pregnant with dread and reverence. Then, with a final deliberate gesture, she completed the last alignment of symbols, the final placement of bones and candles, and whispered words that seemed to reverberate through the very stone of the building. The children exhaled collectively, though their bodies remained rigid as if the room itself had dictated the release. Shadows receded slightly yet remained alive, lingering in corners, twisting in subtle, unsettling ways. Sister Elżbieta stood at the center, observing the culmination of months of planning, of rituals, and of dark devotion. Satisfaction was evident, yet tempered by solemnity. This was not triumph, but the completion of a necessary act in the sacred cycle she had imposed. The orphanage seemed to breathe in tandem with her, walls exhaling centuries of hidden energy, floors absorbing the echo of actions unseen, and the air vibrating with a presence older than memory. Each child had absorbed the lesson, the fear, the obedience, and the knowledge that life within these walls was bound to forces beyond comprehension. Outside, the city remained unaware, yet a subtle shift seemed to ripple through the streets, a whisper of something ancient, unsettling and unseen. Within, the ritual had solidified her dominion. Bones, candles, symbols, shadows, and whispers intertwined, forming an unbroken chain of influence that would persist long after the night ended. Sister Elżbieta's gaze swept over the children, registering not just compliance but understanding, a recognition of the dark harmony she had created. Every element, the meals, the shadows, the silent obedience, the arcane symbols, converged to form a moment suspended between devotion and horror, a climax that none present would ever forget. The night concluded with a final chant, soft yet resonant, sealing the energy, the fear, and the obedience into a rhythm that would continue indefinitely. The children returned to their quarters, silent and pale, carrying the invisible weight of the events while Sister Elżbieta remained in the hall, her presence a lingering testament to control, ritual, and macabre devotion. In the heart of Prague, hidden behind stone walls and flickering lantern light, she had orchestrated the ultimate convergence of life, death, and obedience, leaving an indelible mark on all who had witnessed her dark mastery. Morning broke over Prague with a deceptive calm, the city unaware of the horrors that had unfolded within the orphanage during the long, shadowed night. The streets glistened with frost and the faint warmth of sunlight, but inside the stone walls the atmosphere remained heavy, charged with the echoes of rituals and unseen forces. Sister Elżbieta moved through the halls, inspecting the aftermath with meticulous care, ensuring that every symbol remained intact, every shadow properly aligned, and every child positioned in accordance with the sacred cycle she had imposed. The children, pale and silent, carried the weight of the previous night's events, their small bodies trembling with a mixture of obedience, fear, and understanding beyond their years. They obeyed her without question, performing minor chores with precision, their movements reflecting the lessons etched deep into their minds. The orphanage thrived, yet there was an undercurrent of unease that pulsed beneath the surface, subtle but persistent, felt even by the youngest. Food was prepared as usual, meals served with the same meticulous attention, yet each bite carried the hidden reality of the bones that had nourished them, a secret that bound them invisibly to the nun and her macabre devotion. Townspeople began to whisper, though cautiously, of strange occurrences. Faint metallic smells drifting from windows, shadows moving against the grain of sunlight, and children appearing unusually pale and silent. The priests who visited noted subtle changes, unease that could not be fully articulated, a sense that the orphanage had shifted in some profound, incomprehensible way. Sister Elżbieta maintained her calm, her movements deliberate and precise, reinforcing the rules of obedience and devotion with small gestures, a glance, a subtle nod, or the arrangement of objects in sacred order. The children adjusted instinctively, their bodies and minds attuned to her rhythm, carrying forward the lessons in fear and reverence that defined their existence. Nights continued to bring quiet terror, shadows lingering longer, whispers carried on the wind, and the faint metallic tang in the air serving as a reminder of the hidden truths. The orphanage itself seemed alive, its stone walls absorbing the residue of the rituals, the floors retaining faint imprints of the patterns she had created. Even the rats and stray animals avoided the grounds, sensing the unnatural authority that radiated from her presence. As days passed, her influence extended beyond the walls. Children who had once been sick recovered at a pace that defied explanation, their health appearing miraculous, though tinged with an eerie hollowness. Visitors noted this growth with cautious curiosity, unaware of the grim sustenance that underpinned it. The city outside continued its rhythm, oblivious to the silent horrors at its heart. Bells tolled, merchants shouted, snow fell softly over streets, yet inside time was measured by rituals, obedience, and the precise movements dictated by Sister Elżbieta. Her presence was both protection and threat, an unyielding force that shaped life within the orphanage. The children, though nourished, carried invisible scars, fear etched into their expressions and actions, shadows lingering in their eyes long after she had passed. Even the other nuns who worked alongside her felt the tension, the subtle dominance that governed the orphanage. They moved cautiously, never challenging her authority, aware that her methods, while horrifying, were effective and absolute. Rumors began to spread outside in cautious whispers. Tales of a nun whose devotion blurred morality, whose care was inseparable from horror. Yet few dared to investigate, deterred by fear, respect, or simple disbelief. The orphanage had become a paradox, a place of life and nourishment intertwined with terror and obedience. Each act of care carried hidden weight, each ritual reinforced unseen bonds, and every shadow, whisper, and symbol maintained her dominion. The children adjusted to this reality, instinctively aware that disobedience would bring consequences that went beyond mere discipline. Sister Elżbieta observed quietly, satisfied that the balance had been maintained, that the sacred cycle of life, death, and obedience continued unbroken. Her work had left indelible marks on the orphanage, on the children, and on the very air itself, a lingering testament to a devotion that was as horrifying as it was precise. Even the city, vast and unaware, carried subtle traces of the events, a weight too faint to notice yet undeniably present, echoing the presence of a nun who had transcended conventional morality and shaped a domain entirely her own. The days following the ritual carried a heavy, unnatural quiet through the orphanage. Sister Elżbieta moved among the children with unwavering control, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every gesture. The children, pale and silent, carried the invisible weight of the previous night, their obedience absolute, their fear entwined with reverence. Meals were prepared as always, yet each bite held the hidden reality of bones ground and concealed, nourishing bodies while reinforcing the unspoken bond of fear and devotion. The orphanage itself seemed altered, the stone walls absorbing the residue of rituals, the air thick with lingering energy, shadows stretching in unnatural ways even in daylight. The other nuns, though present, dared not challenge her authority. They followed quietly, performing tasks as instructed, their movements cautious, eyes lowered, understanding that her control was absolute and beyond question. Visitors noticed subtle changes in the children, eyes too wide, movements too precise, a silence that pressed like a living weight. Priests whispered among themselves, uneasy with what they could not explain, sensing something unnatural had taken root, though lacking the courage to confront it. The city outside remained oblivious. Bells rang, merchants called, snow fell lightly, and citizens moved through streets unaware of the darkness pulsing at the heart of the orphanage. Yet even beyond the walls, a subtle unease lingered, carried on the wind, touching those who passed too close. Inside, the children adjusted to the rhythm imposed by Elżbieta. Every day, every chore, every whispered instruction reinforced the lessons of fear and obedience. They moved in silent harmony with her will, understanding without words that disobedience would carry consequences far beyond reprimand. Nights remained long and heavy. Shadows continued to twist unnaturally. Corners whispered, and the faint metallic tang in the air reminded all present of the source of their sustenance. The orphanage thrived in ways that defied understanding. Children grew stronger, healthier, yet their spirits bore the subtle scars of psychological imprint, obedience ingrained alongside fear. The animals avoided the grounds instinctively, sensing the unnatural authority that radiated from Sister Elżbieta. Even the rats and stray dogs, drawn normally to food and warmth, shunned the orphanage as though repelled by unseen forces. The walls bore faint marks of rituals etched over time, symbols preserved meticulously, each one a record of devotion, control, and macabre precision. Shadows in hallways shifted as if alive, responding to her presence while the children moved like silent extensions of her will. Some whispered to each other in barely audible tones, discussing fleeting glimpses of unnatural phenomena, shadows that lingered longer than natural, sounds that carried no source. These moments reinforced the cycle, the silent understanding that the world within the orphanage operated under rules far different from the outside. Townspeople whispered rumors cautiously. Stories of missing animals, strange lights, and chilling noises at night circulated quietly, though none dared approach directly. Even the clergy, aware of her unusual methods, refrained from interference, sensing a force that blended sanctity with something darker. Sister Elżbieta observed all quietly, correcting small deviations, reinforcing the hidden lessons, ensuring that her control remained perfect and unchallenged. Every detail mattered. The arrangement of objects, the subtle cues in posture, the timing of meals, the position of shadows, all woven into a precise, unbroken rhythm that dictated the lives of the children. The children, though nourished, lived with a constant awareness of power beyond their comprehension, shaping their thoughts, behaviors, and instincts. The orphanage had become a living organism, alive with rituals, shadows, whispers, and unseen forces, all meticulously orchestrated by a nun whose devotion had evolved into an obsession beyond morality. Even the city, vast and unaware, carried subtle traces of her influence. A chill in the wind, shadows lengthening oddly, fleeting feelings of unease in those who passed the orphanage gates. The cycle continued unbroken. Each day reinforced obedience, each night solidified fear, and each meal carried hidden sustenance entwined with the macabre. Sister Elżbieta remained a figure of unchallenged authority, a dark presence shaping every life within the walls. The children, trapped in a web of nourishment, fear, and devotion, absorbed the lessons silently, their understanding deeper than words could capture. Life continued, yet forever altered. The orphanage a nexus of control, ritual, and horror that would echo through the children, the building, and the city long after she was gone. Shadows lingered, whispers persisted, and the subtle metallic tang in the air reminded all within that the dark devotion of Sister Elżbieta was enduring, inescapable, and absolute. Even as days turned into weeks, the orphanage remained a place of whispered fears and silent obedience. But beneath the surface, deeper mysteries began to emerge. Sister Elżbieta's rituals, though meticulously recorded in hidden symbols and secret patterns, hinted at knowledge far beyond mortal understanding. Children spoke in hushed tones of figures glimpsed in corners, shadows that did not belong to any known shape, and faint murmurs that carried messages they could not decipher. The metallic scent that lingered in the air seemed stronger on certain nights, curling into the halls as though alive, a subtle reminder that the cycle of fear and nourishment was far from ordinary. Townspeople occasionally reported seeing lights flickering behind the orphanage windows, odd and inconsistent with candlelight, casting shapes that moved as if conscious. Even priests who entered for inspections returned pale and unsettled, their eyes haunted by impressions they could not explain. Some claimed to hear faint whispers echoing from empty rooms, words that sounded like prayers twisted into strange alien cadences. The children, already molded by fear and devotion, began noticing patterns no adult could perceive: the placement of objects in hallways, the alignment of shadows and symbols etched in corners that seemed to glow faintly in candlelight. It was as if the orphanage itself was alive, responding to forces older than memory, bending reality in ways that defied explanation. Sister Elżbieta moved among these mysteries with quiet authority, her eyes always observing, noting subtle shifts in shadows and energy. She performed rituals with precision that suggested communion with powers unseen, calling upon them for guidance, control, and protection. Her devotion had evolved into something beyond understanding, a fusion of sanctity, obsession, and something otherworldly. Even the other nuns, though present, sensed it. Their prayers and routines seemed ordinary, but they too noticed subtle shifts. Objects that changed position, whispers that lingered, shadows that deepened in corners where no light reached. Children whispered to one another about glimpses of pale figures standing silently, vanishing when approached, and about sensations of being watched by presences that had no body. Nights became thicker, heavier, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were breathing, alive with the energy of rituals and secrets. Outside, the city remained oblivious, its streets lit by mundane lights, bells ringing, and citizens moving in their ignorance. Yet subtle ripples carried from the orphanage, animals avoiding its grounds, winds shifting strangely, and a pervasive chill that lingered in nearby alleys. Some parents dared to question, noticing children returning from visits pale, silent, with eyes too aware of the world, bearing a weight that could not be explained. Others dismissed it, believing it discipline or strict nurturing, unaware that the line between care and horror had been irrevocably crossed. Sister Elżbieta, however, maintained control, her rituals becoming more elaborate, her attention to detail perfect. Bones arranged, symbols etched, shadows manipulated, and whispered words intertwined with prayers that seemed to alter the very energy of the orphanage. She moved with supernatural calm, her presence alone bending reality, commanding obedience and instilling fear that went beyond the understanding of any human. Objects subtly shifted when unobserved. Doors creaked as if moved by unseen hands. Faint shapes appeared in corners and vanished without trace. Even the air itself felt heavy, vibrating with subtle energy that resonated with her will. Children began experiencing fleeting visions, a figure at the edge of sight, an impossible shadow, a whispering voice carrying instructions they could not comprehend. They obeyed instinctively, their instincts shaped by fear, devotion, and the unseen laws governing the orphanage. Rumors among townspeople grew, though cautiously. Mentions of vanishing animals, faint lights in windows at impossible angles, and odd noises carried by the wind. Yet no one dared enter or challenge the nun's authority. Her control extended beyond the physical, reaching into the minds and instincts of the children, shaping them in ways both subtle and profound. Shadows, whispers, and symbols formed an intricate web, a living network of influence that defied explanation. Even when alone, the children felt observed, as if the orphanage itself had consciousness, responding to thoughts, movements, and fear. Priests, inspectors, and occasional visitors sensed something unnatural, a tension impossible to articulate, yet left without confrontation, unsettled and wary. Sister Elżbieta's presence remained a constant, unyielding an anchor in a web of unseen forces, rituals, and obsessions. The orphanage had become a nexus of macabre devotion, supernatural mystery, and hidden knowledge, a place where fear, obedience, and life intertwined in ways the outside world could neither see nor comprehend. Each day, each night, reinforced the sense that the building, the children, and Sister Elżbieta herself were part of something larger, something cursed, and profoundly unnatural. The city of Prague remained blind, yet the orphanage pulsed with life, shadows, and secrets older than any living memory, sustained and controlled by the macabre devotion of a nun who had transcended the ordinary. The orphanage carried its secrets silently, each stone wall, each shadowed corner imbued with the residue of rituals that defied explanation. Sister Elżbieta moved through the halls with quiet authority, observing, noting, and adjusting as if every breath she took interacted with forces unseen. The children, trained by fear and devotion, followed her movements instinctively, understanding the rhythm of shadows, the cadence of whispered commands, and the invisible boundaries that governed their lives. Nights remained thick and oppressive. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. Corners seemed to shift, and the faint metallic scent that had become synonymous with her presence lingered in the air, heavy and persistent. Occasionally, figures appeared at the edges of perception, pale, indistinct, and silent, vanishing when approached. Some children spoke of fleeting glimpses of forms standing behind walls, their eyes reflecting lantern light that seemed impossible, their presence both terrifying and magnetic. Sister Elżbieta's rituals intertwined with these phenomena, her precise gestures, chants, and alignments calling upon energies that were older than memory, forces that shaped the orphanage in subtle but undeniable ways. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating with the residue of unseen influence, carrying faint whispers, distant echoes, and imperceptible tremors that only the most sensitive could detect. The children internalized these lessons, their instincts guided by fear, reverence, and the hidden knowledge embedded in the shadows, the objects, and the walls themselves. Townspeople began to notice anomalies. Strange lights flickered through windows at odd hours. Shadows shifted against the natural flow of sunlight, and a pervasive sense of unease settled in the streets surrounding the orphanage. Even the clergy, who visited occasionally, sensed something beyond understanding, a weight that pressed against reason, leaving them pale, unsettled, and hesitant to return. Sister Elżbieta's influence extended beyond the physical realm. She seemed to commune with forces invisible, her chants shaping not just the behavior of children, but bending the energy within the orphanage itself. Floors, walls, and ceilings retained impressions of her rituals, faint etchings, subtle shifts in alignment, and the arrangement of objects that carried significance only she understood. The children became conduits of her will, moving in silent harmony with her instructions, their actions precise, instinctual, and unerring. Shadows mirrored her intent, flickering in response to her gestures, curling around corners and lingering longer than natural. Some children reported hearing whispers guiding their movements, telling them where to place objects, how to arrange meals, or when to move silently from one room to another. These instructions were obeyed without question, the fear and reverence she instilled ensuring compliance. Outside, Prague remained oblivious. The city's rhythm persisted. Bells tolled, merchants called their wares, snow fell lightly on streets, and citizens moved unaware that darkness pulsed at the heart of the orphanage. Even animals sensed the unnatural aura. Rats avoided the floors, stray dogs kept distance, and birds would not linger in the yard. Locals whispered about the orphanage in cautious tones. Tales of missing animals, strange lights, and unexplainable sounds carried through the wind. None dared investigate, all deterred by fear, superstition, or an instinctual sense of the unnatural. Sister Elżbieta maintained control over every element. Objects were aligned, symbols traced in secret corners, meals prepared with hidden macabre elements, and shadows manipulated through precise placement of light and candle. Each act reinforced obedience and fear, creating a complex web of influence that extended to every living being within the walls. Even when alone, the children felt observed, a constant awareness of her presence manifesting in instinctive movements and unspoken understanding. The orphanage itself had become a living organism, responsive to thought, movement, and energy, bound to rituals that merged life, death, and obedience inextricably. Priests and occasional visitors, sensing this unnatural weight, left unsettled, their eyes haunted by impressions they could not describe. The building resonated with the hidden energy, an entity shaped by centuries of unseen influence and now directed by a nun whose devotion had transcended mortal comprehension. Every night, shadows deepened, whispers persisted, and the metallic tang in the air reminded all within of the invisible, macabre force that dictated life inside the orphanage. The children, bound to her will, absorbed lessons that went beyond understanding, learning to obey instinctively, to fear appropriately, and to recognize the presence of forces that no ordinary mind could perceive. The orphanage had become a nexus of mystery, a place where the ordinary laws of life and reality bent to the influence of Sister Elżbieta, a dark figure whose devotion and obsession had created a world both alive and terrifying. Even the city, vast and unaware, carried subtle traces of her influence, a chill in the wind, a shift in shadows, and a sense of unease that lingered without explanation. Within these walls, shadows whispered, symbols resonated, and the invisible energy of ritual persisted, controlled and directed by a nun whose macabre devotion defined the lives of all who entered her domain. The line between care and horror, obedience and fear, nourishment and ritual had vanished entirely, leaving a reality that defied comprehension, yet was perfectly ordered under her watchful gaze. The years passed within the orphanage, yet the shadow of Sister Elżbieta's devotion remained unbroken, etched into every stone, every floorboard, and every frightened heart. Children who had grown under her precise, terrifying guidance carried her influence with them like an invisible weight, their movements, thoughts, and instincts forever shaped by her macabre rituals. Even those who left the orphanage could not escape the echo of her authority. The air itself seemed to remember, thick with the residue of fear and obedience, carrying the metallic tang of bones long consumed, a lingering reminder of what had transpired. Sister Elżbieta moved with the same deliberate precision as always, inspecting, adjusting, and orchestrating, her presence a constant reminder that order, fear, and devotion were inseparable. The city of Prague continued in its ordinary rhythm, oblivious to the dark force pulsing in its heart. Yet subtle changes marked the world around the orphanage. Shadows that lingered too long, wind that carried whispers, and animals that avoided its grounds instinctively. The children, now older, understood the unspoken laws of the orphanage deeply. Their silence was not mere compliance. It was instinctive awareness, a response carved into their minds by years of observing and participating in rituals that merged care and horror. Every meal, every gesture, every shadow was part of a continuum that maintained her authority. Even the other nuns, long accustomed to her presence, moved with caution, aware that any misstep could disrupt the delicate balance that governed life inside the orphanage. Sister Elżbieta's devotion had evolved into a force that transcended the ordinary. She was no longer just a caretaker. She was an orchestrator of unseen energy, manipulating shadows, whispers, and symbols to shape life itself. Every ritual she performed, every bone ground into nourishment, every chant uttered in low, precise tones, reinforced her dominion. The children, bound by fear and reverence, mirrored her discipline and absorbed her lessons without comprehension, carrying the imprint of her will into every corner of their lives. Nights remained oppressive, yet mesmerizing in their ritualistic precision. Shadows twisted unnaturally, corners whispered, and the faint tang of iron in the air reminded all who remained inside that life and nourishment came with an unspoken price. Visitors occasionally sensed the unnatural energy, their instincts warning them of forces beyond understanding, yet none dared linger, all leaving with unease and silent acknowledgement of the power that resided within. The orphanage thrived in ways outsiders could not perceive. Children grew stronger and healthier, yet the hollowness in their eyes revealed the invisible scars of obedience and fear. Every shadow, every whispered chant, and every ritualistic gesture reinforced the cycle, a macabre dance of life and control orchestrated by a nun whose devotion had become something beyond morality. The city, vast and unaware, carried subtle signs of her influence. A chill would linger in the wind, fleeting shadows would stretch impossibly, and a sense of unease would ripple through streets adjacent to the orphanage, all invisible, yet undeniably present. Sister Elżbieta's control extended beyond the visible, shaping the very air, the thoughts, and instincts of all who entered her domain. The children became extensions of her will, silent participants in rituals that blurred the line between life and horror. Even when alone, they felt her presence, guiding movements, shaping actions, and enforcing obedience in ways no human authority could. Years layered the orphanage with the weight of history, shadows, and whispers, each generation of children absorbing the lessons of devotion, fear, and macabre order. The influence of Sister Elżbieta became a persistent, almost tangible energy, threading through the building like a living entity. The city outside remained ignorant, yet a subtle tension lingered in the streets, a shadow of what thrived within the orphanage walls. Every act of care carried an unspoken warning. Every ritual reinforced obedience, and every shadow whispered reminders of the power that governed life and death. The line between nurture and horror had been erased, leaving an indelible mark on the orphanage, the children, and the very essence of reality within its walls. Sister Elżbieta stood at the center of it all, a figure of unwavering authority, whose devotion and obsession had created a world both horrifying and meticulously ordered, where life, shadows, and fear intertwined seamlessly. The orphanage, alive with whispers, shadows, and memories of rituals, became a testament to her control, a place where the ordinary laws of morality and reality had been bent, reshaped, and forever haunted by the presence of a nun who had transcended the bounds of human comprehension. Time flowed relentlessly, yet within the orphanage the past, present, and shadowed mysteries coexisted in a suspended rhythm, orchestrated entirely by Sister Elżbieta. The children who remained carried the weight of countless unseen lessons, their bodies nourished but their spirits marked by fear and obedience that had been woven into their very essence. Shadows clung to corners, twisting and bending in ways that seemed to acknowledge her presence, while the metallic tang in the air reminded all who breathed it of the hidden horrors that underpinned life within these walls. Even as the city moved beyond the orphanage gates, bustling with commerce, bells, and snow-dusted streets, a subtle tension lingered, a whisper of the unnatural that could not be explained. Sister Elżbieta continued her rituals with unwavering precision. Bowls arranged with bones, candles placed to manipulate shadows, and symbols etched to channel invisible energies, all formed an intricate network that dictated life within the orphanage. Each ritual reinforced obedience, fear, and the balance of nourishment intertwined with terror. The children moved instinctively in harmony with these unseen laws, their actions precise, their silence absolute, a reflection of the deep control she had instilled. Nights remained a theater of shadows, whispers, and subtle energy. Figures flickered at the edges of perception, vanishing when approached, while soft, haunting murmurs echoed from corners that appeared empty. Even the older children, now more aware of the patterns, obeyed without hesitation, understanding instinctively that disobedience would invoke consequences beyond comprehension. The walls themselves seemed alive, breathing with the accumulation of rituals and energy, carrying the weight of all that had occurred. Visitors, though rare, felt the oppressive presence instantly. Priests, inspectors, and the few parents who dared to enter left with pale faces, haunted by impressions that could not be articulated, a deep-seated understanding that something extraordinary and unnatural thrived within the stone walls. Sister Elżbieta observed all quietly, her gaze steady, hands precise, every gesture deliberate. She had become not just a caretaker but an orchestrator of life, shadows, and unseen forces, her devotion elevating her beyond human morality. The children absorbed this presence, their instincts and comprehension shaped by years of exposure to fear, ritual, and obedience intertwined. Every meal, every whispered instruction, every alignment of objects, and every shadow reinforced a system that was at once nurturing and horrifying. Even animals responded to the power she exuded. Rats, birds, and dogs avoided the orphanage instinctively, sensing the unnatural energy that suffused every inch. Time layered the orphanage with history, each ritual, each shadow, and each whisper leaving a permanent trace. The presence of Sister Elżbieta had transformed the building into a living organism, responsive to thought, movement, and ritual. The city remained unaware, yet subtle signs of her influence persisted. A sudden chill in the wind, elongated shadows that defied logic, and an inexplicable unease in streets surrounding the orphanage. Within, shadows whispered, objects shifted ever so slightly, and the residue of rituals clung to floors, walls, and ceilings, a constant reminder of her control. The children, both nourished and haunted, existed in perfect alignment with her will, their minds and bodies extensions of the careful orchestration that had defined their existence for years. Even when alone, they felt the weight of her presence, an invisible hand guiding movements, shaping behavior, and enforcing the macabre rhythm that governed their lives. As years accumulated, the orphanage became a nexus of life, fear, devotion, and shadow, a place where ordinary rules of morality, obedience, and natural law were suspended and rewritten under her direction. Sister Elżbieta remained at the center, a figure of dark devotion and absolute authority, her rituals, whispers, and shadows perpetuating a cycle that would endure beyond her lifetime. The orphanage, alive with unseen forces and macabre order, stood as a testament to a life intertwined with horror, obedience, and the unnatural mastery of a nun who had shaped reality itself. Each child, each shadow, and each whisper carried the mark of her influence, an indelible reminder that life, fear, and devotion were inseparably bound in the heart of the orphanage. In the stillness of the night, the air vibrated with her presence. The walls remembered every ritual, and the children existed forever changed, nourished in body but haunted in soul, a living legacy of the macabre devotion that defined Sister Elżbieta's world.